So we're moving into Acts 18, verses 1 through 22. This is another time where Paul goes to yet another city. And it seems like that's what he likes doing. He likes visiting cities. It's like he was driven to do such a thing. Like he's following in the footpaths of the Lord who visited cities when he was on earth as well. Speaking of cities, when we think of cities, we tend to focus on our present day of thinking of what they are, how they're structured, and everything else. But the thing is, cities have been around for centuries. When we look at our modern view, we're only seeing a small chunk of what cities are. We tend to forget that the cities in the time of Christ has the similar problems as the cities of today. Why is that, you're wondering? Because people are people. That's the only way I can say it. Paul enters into the city of Corinth, and this is no different. It's kind of the same city. If we look in today, the problems at Tartu or Houston or Sioux Falls or Albany or wherever is going to have the same problems as the city of Corinth did. It was also, but the thing that set it apart from other cities mostly is it was a city that lacked moral restraint. From what I've been told, there is a famous saying about Corinth in the ancient times that a sailor could lose his money in Corinth. That's not a good saying to have attached to your city. It's kind of like when someone goes to Vegas and they say you'll lose your money in Vegas. Also, from what I read, is the city was 2/3 full of slaves. That means over half the city was full of slaves from all over the Roman world. Wherever Rome had conquered at that time, they brought them there. But also it had a temple of Aphrodite up on the hill, on its highest place. Aphrodite was the Greek goddess of what they say at that time, love, when in actuality she was the goddess of desire. Men would go and women would go to that temple to present money there for a specific reason, and that was to indulge in their desire, their bodily flesh. But also, the city held certain games before each Olympics. So there was a lot of athletes that came out of the city. The city is not any different than any other city when we look into our modern times. It was a city filled with rife with pain, hurt, and suffering and immorality in any city that we can see today. So we should expect this city treats Paul as the other cities have treated him. We've gone through his journey, and every city has treated him poorly, so this one being a city filled with sin, should treat him just the same. But let's get into actually what happens in this story here. So I'll be reading verses 1 through 8. It says, after these things he left Athens and went to Corinth. He found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, having recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews leave Rome. And he came to them because he was of the same trade, staying with them, and where they were working, for their trade was tent making. And he was reasoning in the synagogues every Sabbath, trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. But when Silas and Timothy came down from Macedonia, Paul began to devote himself completely to the word, solemnly testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. But they resisted and blasphemed, and he shook out his garments, and said to them, "Your blood be on your heads. I am clean. From now on I will go to the Gentiles." And he left there and went to a house of a man named Titus Justus, a worshiper of God, whose house was next to the synagogue. Crispus, the leader of the synagogue, believed in the Lord with all his household. And many Corinthians, when they heard, were believing and being baptized. So we see here something. A government official in that first verse doesn't understand the difference between the old covenant and the new covenant. This should give us kind of an idea that the emperor of Rome was never all-knowing or all-seeing. He isn't the God that he's presenting himself to be. If he can't discern the difference between the old covenant and the new covenant, he actually doesn't know what's going on. It shows his lack of ability to understand. But thankfully, in that lacking of understanding, he unknowingly sent 2 new workers to Paul. And we can learn from something from this. When the higher-ups, when the government officials fail us, we should look for those that they are sending us. How we can involve ourselves in their lives that those they have failed. Because they are not, those government officials, they are not to know everything or be omniscient in everything. They have a specific task they need to accomplish, and they will do it to their best ability. And in their mistakes, they will send us workers. They will send us people that we can join together, and we need to be open arms to them and welcoming them. So that way, when, just as Paul gained new people from Claudius, the emperor's ignorance, we also can welcome in others as well. And it was nice for him. We can see that how that would be benefiting Paul. Now he has someone to work with. Now he has someone to talk to. He's not feeling possibly so alone, because we only know that he is there. But now he has 2 people to work with him. And that could be a comforting thing. Such a wonderful thing to have. And then later on in the verses in 5 and 6, we see that Silas and Timothy finally get to join him as well. And then that allows Paul, now that he has people with him, 4 other workers to help him along in the work that he wants to do, that God wants to do through them, that he can solely focus on one task. He can solely focusing on telling the Jews about Christ. This is a thing where we can come, bring people in, how we involve them in their lives, in the lives of the church. That way, when we have a task at hand, we can solely focus on that task. That way we don't get overwhelmed or even underwhelmed at times. We can just say, I have this task and I can do it. Because this is God is allowing Paul to give his gift, which is solemnly preaching the word, his word, that Jesus is the Christ. That way we can do the same. We can solemnly do one thing for him. But one of the things that I want to point out here is we see that in verse 6 that the people that he's preaching to, the Jewish people, that his brethren, they're rejecting, they're resisting. The word here, blasphemy, that is a strong word. It doesn't mean they're just like, whatever. They were really being cruel about the words they were using in God's name. And we see Paul is so angry at them. And he has every right to be angry at them, because they are blaspheming God's name. They are making God a mockery of God's name. And he says, your blood be on your heads. That is a sign of that he is so frustrated. So just, it sounds like he's almost done with them. He's shaking his garments, which means he's knocking the dust off his heel on the sandals. He doesn't want to deal with them anymore. He's so angry at them, so frustrated that they don't want to listen. But he says, I am clean, because he's saying, I obeyed. Or as you mock and blaspheme, I obey, I am clean. Even my past, I am clean of that. And then he says, for now I will go to the Gentiles. It sounds like, oh, he's completely ignored them. He's completely put them off. He is so done with them. I'm never going to talk to you ever again. It's almost what it sounds like what he's saying. But in the next verse, in the next section, 7th and 8th, we see that he's so angry at them, so mad at them, he moves next door. Have you ever been so angry and so frustrated with somebody, you're like, I'm terribly angry at you, I'm going to move next door to you though. This is something we can learn. This is something we need to learn from. Because sometimes we can become greatly annoyed with people that we're reaching out to. We can be like, I am just so done with you. We never want to move far from them. We can tell them we're frustrated. We can tell them we're annoyed with them. We can tell them you're not listening. But I'm not going to go far from you. I'm going to move right next door. It should give us kind of a boldness to speak, continue to speak God's words. To when we are in the community and parts of the community aren't listening, we can say, okay, fine, I'm mad and frustrated with you, but I'm going to go here, next door to you. And then you will get to see what happens next. He's never denying them the light of God. He's still in their present lives. They will still see him every day, going into that house and talking to the Gentiles. And this might aggravate some people. Aggravate them so much that they might actually come to you and will actually want to hear what you have to say. Because in the next verse, in verse 8, we see that the leader of the synagogue believes. One of the things that I noticed is that he believed in the Lord with all his household. Again, all the people that are under him and around him believed. One of the things that I find very striking is that he believed with all his household, not with all his heart. Yes, that's already in there. That fact that he is believing, the fact that he is being baptized, the fact that he is there with his household. He was wanting to bring his whole household to God, to Christ, to be baptized. That shows that he was believing in all his heart. He wasn't just doing it to do it. He wanted everyone to be around him. So imagine this. You're frustrated with someone you're working with, and they're just being very stubborn-headed about everything. It seems like they're not getting it. What Paul is demonstrating here, all you have to do is shift your focus and say, okay, I'll go here. You're going to still see me, but I'm going to work here. And then you will realize something is different, and you'll come, and you'll want to hear now. It's one of those, I don't like using the word tactic, but it's a tactic that benefits God. Because he's never denying them the Word of God. He's just changing his focus on where it needs to be. And in that, they are spurred to want to know more. We see that because Crispus brings his whole family, whole household, into believing in the Lord. Essentially, his household joins the household of Christ. And we see all this wonderful work happening. Paul's got new family. Paul has new workers. Paul has his Silas and Timothy back, which are his sons, essentially. He's got everything that he needs. But something he really needs comes in the next 3 verses. This is something we see that must be something on his mind and on his heart, because it is directly addressed by the King, by Christ. In verses 9, 10, and 11. And then the Lord said to Paul in a vision, in the night by a vision, "Do not be afraid any longer. Go on speaking and do not be silent, for I am with you. No man will attack you in order to harm you, for I have many people in this city." And he settled there for 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. Paul in his mind, must have been struggling with something then, for Christ to fully and want to directly address it. Even though he had work going on, even though he had friends there, even though he had sons there, he needed that comfort. And Christ gave it to him. Christ comforts Paul in this time of need, because in every other city that we've seen, Paul's been run out of. He's been beaten. He's been chased. So he might be expecting, I'm doing it again. Things are happening. All right, they should be coming to my door any minute now to stone me, to hit me with rods. But no, he is reassured by Christ. That part where it says, "Do not be afraid," is something that we can hold in. We don't have to be afraid in these cities. It also reminds me of another story in the Old Testament where God, a living God, reaches out to another man in time of need. This time it's Elijah. He's done these great works. He brought fire down upon the pagan world and ravished it, making a mockery of these pagans. And then yet, all of a sudden, someone threatens his life and he's afraid. He runs off to Mount Horeb. And there, God, he's wondering what he needs to be doing. God's saying, "You need to rest." And then, at one point, we see God. He's like, "I need to see you, Lord." And God shows him. He shows this wind that crumbles the earth around him, but it says God's not there. And then there is an earthquake, but God's not there. And then there's fire, but God's not in the fire. And then all of a sudden, we see that he's wrapped in a mantle, and he hears whisper in his ear, in the smallness of the wind, God asking, "What are you doing here?" And then there's where we see God. God made this big display of his power, and yet he's saying in the smallest of things, the smallest of ways. This is the same kind of thing where Jesus is comforting Paul in that moment. Now Elijah is wondering what he's doing. He's confused. He's done this great work, but he's thinking he's the only one out there. And then God says, "No, I have 7,000 that are for you. That are for me," specifically, God is saying. "You're not alone." The reverse, and we see Paul having all his family there, and he might be feeling alone. And Jesus saying, "No, you're not alone, Paul. I am with you. I am with you." This is something we can take great comfort in. We hear it again in Hebrews 13, verses 5 and 6. "Let your character be free from love. Be free from the love of money. Be content with what you have. For he said, I will never desert you, nor will I forsake or let you down or relax my hold on you." So we take comfort. And are encouraged and confidently say, "The Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What will man do to me?" What will man do to us? If Elijah was comforted, if Paul was comforted, we can definitely say that we will be comforted. it's one of those things we tend to, when things get tough, when we're in these cities and we feel that we're being beat up over and over and over again, just as Paul has been beat up, we know we can be comforted. There is proof that we will be comforted. If God's doing it in the Old Testament, Jesus is doing it in the New Testament, and Hebrews 13:8 says Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever, then we can definitely say we can be comforted today. If He's never changing, then we can take comfort in that as well. He is with Paul here. That means He is with us now, today. We shouldn't be afraid, for as He said here to Paul in verse 10, for I am with you. And we know He is with us now. He is with us in our community together. He is most definitely with us when we read the Word, when we are showing love to each other. He is with us there as well. When we are reaching out to the community that is frustrated against us, He is with us then. He has not forsaken us, and He will never do that. So we should not be afraid of Him ever abandoning us. He's not a God of abandonment. He's a God of comfort and loving. And we should never have that fear of abandonment in our hearts. So, in this two verses that these two little verses, these few little words that Christ says to Paul, gives him enough encouragement to stay in a city full of rife of pain, hurt, morality, and everything for a year and 6 months. Because he's been comforted by God. Christ has told him, no one's going to hurt you. I have people here, so no one's going to hurt you. That gave him enough to say, all right, I can endure this long. This is, when we see this, we see that this is probably one of the longest times he's actually able to stay in a city. A year and 6 months. That's quite a long time for him to sit there and completely focus on the Christ. I mean, that Jesus being the Christ. When we have confidence in Him, when we have the confidence and the reassurance of Him, that we know that He is with us, we can endure more. We can endure more. Because we know He is always with us. Even when it feels like we're failing in the works that He has set us to do, He has not abandoned us. He will never abandon us. We can endure that. We can also be very reassured that He will not leave us alone in our trials. Because we will all go through trials. I mean, if Christ went to the cross, we should expect hardships. He is still even there with us in that time. That should give us boldness. That should give us the want to continue to preach His Word. That should continue to want us to love our enemies. That should continue to want us to reconcile with people that we've been angry with or who's been angry with us. That should give us the boldness to reach out into a community that sometimes might reject us. And when they do, we say, okay, I'm going to go over here and see how you like it over here. My kindness and God's kindness, passion, and love is going to be over here. So that way they can see it. We can have that boldness in us. Because it's not our own will driving us. It is His love driving us forward. And then, of course, we see something that's happened again in the cities. But this time, Paul gets justice. So in verses 12 to 22, it sounds like a big chunk, but it's going to go by quick. But while Gallio was the proconsul of Achaia. The Jews with one accord rose up against Paul and brought him before the judgment seat, saying, "This man persuades men to worship God contrary to the law." But when Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, "If it were a matter of wrong or a vicious crime, O Jews, it would be reasonable for me to put up with you. But if there are questions about words, names, and your own law, look at it after yourselves. I am unwilling to judge of these matters." And he drove them away from the judgment seat. And they all took a hold of Sosistius, the leader of the synagogue, and began beating him in front of the judgment seat. But Gallio was not concerned about any of these things. Paul, having remained many days longer, took leave of his brethren and put out to sea for Syria. With him were Priscilla and Aquila. In Caesarea, he had his hair cut, for he was keeping a vow. Then they came to Ephesus, and he left them there. Now he himself entered into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. And when they asked him to stay for a little longer time, he did not concede. By taking leave of them, saying, "I will return to you again if God wills it." And then he sailed from Ephesus. When he landed in Caesarea, he went up and greeted the church and went down to Antioch. He got justice in that very beginning. We see what Christ said was true. No one was going to harm him ever again. The judgment seat is this place. We should think of it as a courtroom. The proconsul is sitting on this judgment seat. It is a place of authority. And the Jewish people brought him before this authority. But thankfully, Gallio, the proconsul, reasoned that it wasn't in his scope to judge this thing. He threw this case out of court, essentially. He says, "This is not for me to judge. It's gone. Get it out of here. I have no reason for this." So they bring Paul again in front of a judgment seat. This time they bring him in front of a judgment seat to have him be judged. And then he is not judged. Actually, he is judged rightly because he's been doing nothing but preaching and teaching the Word of God. As Gallio says, there's no crime here. Where is the crime? Y'all are just having a disagreement about words and names. That's not a crime. Get away from me. That's essentially what he's saying. Go. I don't want you in my presence. And then verses 16 and 17, we see Jesus true. What Jesus says has become true. No harm comes, but justice is served. Can you imagine being Paul, city after city after city, he's being beaten and run out. Jesus comes to him and says, "No one's going to harm you." We can have confidence in that. He probably had a great amount of confidence, but there was probably something in the back of his mind that says, "Okay, I believe you, Lord. I'm going to keep on walking. I'm going to keep on preaching with you." And then all of a sudden, he sees it. The justice that he needed to see, he sees it. The men that brought him before to be beaten are now being beaten. I don't know why the Greeks, or the men who brought everyone to the judgment seat, I don't know why they solely attacked him. But it showed Paul no one was going to attack him. And it also showed Paul that justice has been served. That he is comforted. That he is protected. We should take confidence in that. And now when we're doing things for God, no one can do anything. No one's going to stand against us. If we're showing love, compassion, and kindness of God throughout completely and totally, and someone takes us to court for it,